Thierry Mandon a décrit ce matin ce qui pourrait être un modèle de transformation numérique à la française avec la coproduction des services numériques. Donc maintenant, on va passer au modèle anglais avec donc la question de ce début de matinée, Is UK the new Obama? Elle part du constat que la sortie progressive d'une longue Obamania coïncide avec le retour sur le devant de la scène des productions, des sites et des mouvements d'activistes anglais, avec bien sûr gov.uk que vient présenter Russell Davies et FutureGov, avec Dominic Campbell, et évidemment Blue State Digital qui existe aussi à Londres et dont Sam Jeffers est le directeur. Donc, we're very happy to have you this morning, Russell, because gov.uk seems to be the website who brought back the Brits on the top of the trends. Welcome.
Sound present once, and he started like that. And I just thought all presentations must start like that from now on. That is me. Because it's early and it's hot, I thought I'll tell you what I'm going to say in the first 4 slides, and then if you want to drift off for a bit, you can. What I'm going to say is digital transformation is inevitable. It's not an option. Either your organisation will transform or it will be replaced by one that has. And that will mean, inevitably, that marketing, comms, whatever you call it, will have less or no money, influence or power. And the people who build the products or the services will have all or more of the money, influence and power. It isn't about IT. It's not about comms. It's about how your organisation does everything that it does. And it's not about heroic interventions and brilliant ideas. It's about users, teams, and iteration. It's not about heroes. It's not about Obamas. There's not a question of, is it the next Obama? It's just teams of people doing boring stuff. This is Michael Slaby, who actually ran a lot of the original Obama campaign. Sam, you probably know him. In talking about how they made the Obama campaign digital, he said, it's just culture change. It's not complicated, it's just hard. And that's the truth of this. It is not complicated, it's really straightforward. There are no magic strategic ideas. There is no genius, clever thing that you need to do. There are no magic tricks. You can read any book or any blog post about how to do this. It's just hard. You just actually have to do it. So, read a few blog posts and you'll know what to do. So my presentation will take the conventional presentation 3-act structure of this. I will start with the establishing credibility in the boasting. So I've spent about 20 years working on what happens when brands meet digital services. So if I'd been talking to you 5 years ago, I'd have shown you lots of cool Nike and Honda stuff, which is what I used to do, and lots of cool, clever videos off the internet and things like that. But now I work for the Government Digital Service. So I am literally going to show you screen grabs of government websites. So, sit back and prepare for a roller coaster ride of excitement. We exist because of this letter sent by Martha Lane Fox to Francis Maude, who was the minister at the time, which was a report. She was asked about the state of the government's websites, the 2 big ones, which are called Direct Gov and Business Link. And she wrote back and said, well, not only are they no good, the whole of what government does online is no good, you should change it all. And she headlined the report, Revolution, Not Evolution, which was very convenient for us. This was not about incremental change, this was about starting again. First thing we did is a single domain for government called gov.uk, and here is a quick video about it.
Hi, I'm Adi Adiwumi. I work at the Government Digital Service, and I'm here to tell you about gov.uk. We launched gov.uk in October 2012. It replaced the two big central government websites, DirectGov and BusinessLink. The idea was to make something simpler, clearer and faster, something focused on users. Firstly, we took a careful look and worked out what services and information we actually needed to deliver. We thought, for instance, that we could probably stop spending taxpayers' money telling people how to haggle when abroad, or how to identify different kinds of waves. We eliminated thousands of pages that no one ever visited. Then we made sure that the information we were providing was as easy to find and to follow as possible. This, for example, is the page on DirectGov that tells you about bank holidays. Now, it has all the information you need, and you'd think it'd be hard to do it better. But looking at how people actually use the site, we realised that what most people were searching for was the date of the next bank holiday. So we put that right at the top of the page, big and bold. We've done the same thing to more complex tasks, like working out how much maternity pay you're entitled to. Before, on DirectGov, you'd need to read all this information. On gov.uk, you just need to answer a few simple questions, and the site calculates the answer for you. In April 2013, we finished moving all departmental sites to gov.uk, together with the sites for Number 10 and the Deputy Prime Minister's office. So instead of every government page having a different design and different navigation, every site now looks and works the same way. At the same time, we've rethought how policy is presented online. Before gov.uk, if you wanted to understand government policy on something like gangs, for instance, you'd have needed to visit all these separate pages. Now, there's a single page for each policy, and all the departments involved share the responsibility for keeping it up to date. You can even subscribe to those policy pages so that you're always kept informed of any changes. And if you're responsible for a particular policy, you can find out how often it's being looked at and how closely it's being read. Today, gov.uk is handling more web traffic than the sites it replaced at a far lower cost, and users get to the information they need quicker than they did before. Gov.uk is not perfect, and it's not finished. It's never going to be. It's designed to improve, to react to user needs. We've made thousands of changes to gov.uk, and we make small improvements almost every day. This idea, iterative, responsive change, is at the heart of everything we do. You should visit us at www.gov.uk. Hopefully, you'll see something you like. Something simpler, clearer, and faster.
So that's one of the things we do. That saves lots of money and makes things easier for people. There is inevitably lots of work to do. One of the things that it's important to communicate in these circles is that things like websites are not buildings. They are not finished. You can't criticise them as though they are finished, or praise them as though they are finished. Kind of talking about a website, and you have to accept that it will change and it will iterate. And as institutions have to accept that they will change and iterate. They can't launch something and then leave it alone. But gov.uk, so work in progress. The other things we are doing, the big things we're doing, we're building an identity system, so a common way to sign into government services. That doesn't create a single big government database of everyone's identity. We now run the technology profession across government, so effectively technology reports to digital. The essence of that is no more big IT thinking. If you'd looked up government's technology supplier base, done a postcode lookup on it 5 or 6 years ago, the suppliers would have been there, and now they're here. We need to be able to access people like Dominic, frankly, in order to build services for government, and we've had to make that easier. As you say, IT reports to digital, which means technology supports services, and services support users. So technology needs to be in service to users. We also do lots of measurement. And so there's a thing called the Performance Platform, which reports on all of the services that government runs, and particularly all the digital services. And then there's a big programme which kind of came to an end at the beginning of this year of transformation. So government does about the UK government does about 1.3 billion transactions a year across 660 services, which isn't very many. WhatsApp will do that in an hour. The smallest one, right down the far end side, is about 11 transactions a year, which is applying for a license to be buried at sea. We are not rushing to digitise that. The biggest one is stamp duty, which is an automated service. The top 50 of those transactions account for about 90% of the volume of transactions that government does. So we have taken half of those and started to try and transform those services, build end-to-end digital services that work well. 25 of the biggest services in government redesigned to meet the needs of users. Things like applying for a carer's allowance. That's a thing you can get. You can get a small amount of money if you're solely responsible for caring for someone. Building that service, which we did together with DWP, one of our big departments, transforming that digitally meant for the first time that it worked on a mobile phone. And when you make that happen, you discover a thing that, for instance, suddenly we got loads of people applying to use carer's allowance at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that was the only time they had to themselves that they could do something. Before that service was available on mobile, those people just weren't applying. So as soon as you make a service easier to use, you create kind of new patterns. Things like register to vote. We've moved registering to vote from being a paper-based service to being, again, a service you could do on your phone. So that's the spike in applications that you got to register to vote the day before the deadline for voter registration. All of those people would have missed it beforehand. So again, that happens. Or something like this, making a lasting power of attorney. So a service that enables you to specify what will happen to your assets and things like that if you're infirm and can't make decisions for yourself. So lasting power of attorney used to be a very complex paper transaction where we would send you, because there are lots of edge cases and odd uses around we would send you all the paperwork for every conceivable thing you might need to do, which just scared people. And they went and found a lawyer to help them fill in the application. We've turned that into a digital process, again, working with the Office of the Public Guardian and the Ministry of Justice, turn that into a digital application, which makes it a lot simpler. And the only people upset about that are lawyers. And what happens then is you find things like this. We got a call from the help centre that supports lasting power of attorney, called us up and say, you have to help us. Something's happened that's never happened before. We've received positive feedback. And so we need to add a button to the system so we can log positive feedback, because it's never happened before. But more importantly than that, what you get is things like this.
I'm 67 and I've done the lasting power of attorney for my mother. My mum's grasp on modern day living, as it was a bit limited, so it was decided then that I would pay all the bills, sort everything out for her. 3 years ago I had a stroke, and you start thinking about your own mortality, and you start thinking about, well, if something had have happened to me, then how would Mum have coped? What would have happened? Anyway, looking on the internet, and I literally stumbled across the government site for the lasting power of attorney. Started to look at it and I thought, this is good, because you can download all the paperwork yourself. You don't need a solicitor. And the instructions that went with each section of the lasting power of attorney were in proper people speak, not in legal jargon. So it was very easy for me to follow it. If I can do it, anybody can do it, you know. It's easy. The written instructions, you just can't go wrong. And I would say now to anybody, don't be frightened, don't worry about going to see a solicitor. Do it yourself. I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I did it when I did it, and and my mum's really pleased. And can I say thank you?
Of course you can.
Yeah, of course you
I
can.
just want to say thank you to everybody involved in doing the website, because it's given me peace of mind, and I'm sure it gives a lot of people peace of mind. And my friend now is doing that, and you've made it so simple and so easy for anybody to do. And I just hope that anybody who sees this film, please do it, and you'll feel so relieved afterwards. You know, it's great to know that the people that you care for, everything's looked after for them. Thank you.
So people ask us how we get the world's best digital people to come and work for us for below market rate, and that is how. I'm going to skip this bit because we're a bit behind, so hang on. I'll come back some other time and do that. The key bit here is Mike, the boss, always talks about what happens when the internet meets any sector as it changes the organizing principle. It changes, so with music, it changed from being a producer-based system to being a distribution-based system. And what's happening and must happen to government stuff is it changes the organising principle from being about what governments want to what users want. And I think the biggest symptom of that that's happened in our world is that you had this small section of speech in the House of Commons.
Of the Government Digital Service, which is committed to ensuring that as we reform the delivery of public services, they are designed around the needs of the user, rather than has been far too often the case in the past, being designed to suit the convenience of the government.
Gary Streeter, Mr. Speaker.
This is a big thing in understanding a lot of basic questions about how you do this stuff, is that it's based on user need. It's based on what users want to do. It's not based on what you want to communicate. It's not based on how you want to communicate. And the beauty of digital stuff, of websites, is you can see what users are doing and see what they need, and you can build stuff that reacts to that. That's important. That gets round loads of decisions you might otherwise have to make. So 2 quick bits to finish of actually useful things. First thing, we're not here to do innovation. We're not in a position to do innovation. And that's not just a government thing. I think that's across most sectors. So a little while ago, I bought a digital camera, and I got that, you know, that sort of instruction manual you get with not many instructions in lots of different languages. I got one of those. I thought I need more instructions than that, so there was a handy URL. So I thought I'll go to that URL and I'll get more instructions. If you go to that address, you get this page. If you scroll to the bottom of it and click on UK, you get this page, which is the same as before, but with flags, which is nice. If you click on the UK there, you get this page. If you type the model number of the camera into that, you get this page with 2 identically named PDFs. The first PDF is an instruction about how to put a strap on the camera, which I had already done. And the second PDF is the original manual that they give you when you buy the camera. At the same time as this, Sony was doing all kinds of innovative marketing campaigns, persuading people to engage with their cameras, etc. It's like it just fixed the basics. Someone tweeted a while ago this: just basic web and mobile UX fixes would catapult so many people ahead of their users. You only need to look for a few minutes on Twitter to find companies that describe themselves as innovative and user-focused and, you know, all that kind of stuff, doing things like this. It's like you shouldn't be spending time thinking about stuff like this because the chances are your website doesn't work. Bezos said this: people don't want gadgets anymore, they want services that improve over time. That's all we're doing, is services that improve over time. As an example, there's a bank launching in the UK this year whose USP is that it will actually work. Compared to most other banks, services will actually work. That's all it's trying to offer to people. How many of you have used Windows XP recently? How many of you have used a cash machine recently? ATM. You're all using Windows XP. Like most cash machines run on Windows XP, which Microsoft no longer supports. You know, it's kind of, they've done special deals with the banks, you'll be reassured to know. But those are the kind of legacy systems that are going on. I read a thing in Harvard Business Review recently talking about banking and the idea that one day there won't be any branches, that it will all be entirely digital. And these very clever, smart, sensible analysts at the Harvard Business Review said that is impossible because financial products are so complicated that you will want them explained to you in person at a branch. It literally didn't occur to them that you could make the services simpler. That would be the thing to do. Because digital organizations look at problems and think, this is easy to fix. The same problems that non-digital organizations, it simply doesn't occur to them that they're fixable. It's not that they can't do it, it's not that they don't know how to do it or they're unwilling to do it. It just doesn't occur to them that they're fixable. So we have these design principles, you know, which are just fine. You know, they're sensible. I think the most important one is to do the hard work to make it simple, because the goal is not digital. The goal is the simplicity that digital can enable. It's not about making your services digital, it's making your services simple, and digital lets you do that. That's why informally, I get in loads of trouble with my team for this. Our informal motto is no new ideas. We do not need any new ideas. We need to make some of the ones we've already had actually work. That's what we're trying to do. Second thing, very quickly, make things open, it makes things better. Again, one of our design principles. All our code's on GitHub. We write a long, detailed, sometimes boring service manual about how the services should work. It's really transparent to people. And doing that, that means that was the alpha of gov.uk, for instance. That's the first version of, was it? No, it was the beta. That was the beta of gov.uk that we released, all the code in the open. Quite soon after that, this appeared, which is the website for Honolulu Answers, using the same code as we'd built for gov.uk, and weirdly, some of the same content, which must have been confusing in Honolulu. That's the beta of the New Zealand government website, using our code, using our design patterns. These are local authorities in the UK or health organisations in the UK using some of the same stuff. What's starting to happen is there are starting to be emergent design patterns across public services, across the UK, across the world. If you tried to do that by a mandate from the EU or the UN or whoever it might be, it would never have happened. But because of sharing between institutions, that's starting to happen, and that will be good for users. And similarly with design principles, the thing we've found happens all the time is basically, I mean, they're okay, they're perfectly sensible. What's remarkable about them is that it's a government saying this. So we have people all the time coming to us and going, I was able to go into my meeting and tell my boss, we need to do it this way, we have to do it this way. Even the government thinks we should do that. And that kind of makes a big difference. You know, that thing, if the government can do this, why can no one else? Why can't anyone else do it? And in summary,
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for letting us improve our fast reading skills. Thank you for inspiring all the public servants, designers, and people actually working on government websites here in France. And thank you, first and foremost, maybe for making it sound simple, so simple, maybe a little too simple, but it's absolutely great. Just a word to introduce, in French, I'm afraid, Dominic Campbell right now. Dominic alors lui a une expérience puisque dans les services gouvernementaux. Il a travaillé 6 ans donc pour l'administration et il a fondé une start-up qui s'appelle FutureGov et qui aujourd'hui conçoit et édite des services qui eh bien, assistent, aident les services publics et notamment les services publics locaux à, disons, réaliser leur mission. Donc, Dominic, from what you sent us, I understood that you would try to show us the way and help us understand how you slide from improving services through digital to literally transforming services through digital. The floor is yours.
Okay. So thanks a lot for having me. Sorry, none of the Brits, I believe, are going to do their presentations in French, but that is very predictable. Sorry also that we're all men. Maybe we can have questions from women during the after bit. So basically, it's a good start. Well, it's difficult going after Russell, but also just yes to all of that. And I can probably sit down pretty much. I would say that Russell probably is underplaying some of it, particularly the politics of it, which essentially came down to Martha Lane Fox asked the politician to make it happen, and it happened. We all know that it's a bit more complicated than that, and our lives at FutureGov is in that world really, where we work with 400 autonomous local government organisations that don't all have. Maybe none of them have a Francis Maud who understands digital politically and is able to create the space for that kind of action to happen. So I guess my experience is slightly different to Russell's in the sense that I spend probably 90% of my life talking politics with a big P and a small p, and digital, unfortunately, is the easy bit at the end of all of that, really, quite often. I'm going to probably talk somewhere between Thierry and Russell in terms of talking around getting the basics right and fixing things, but also reinventing and thinking about how you can think about government from a slightly different angle. GDS has definitely made life easier for us. We've been around since 2008, and life was really hard for the first 3 years, where people in government really didn't understand what digital was, and life has become a hell of a lot easier for it, although now we spend our time competing for talent, also underpaid versus market value. So it's an interesting world when you compete with your own government for digital talent, how times have changed. Also, to sort of reinforce what Russell was saying around organisation design and how the model of government is changing as a result of digital, much like anything else. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I think, our strapline is expect better as a company. And for me, the starting point a lot of the time is around raising the expectations of people in government and people who use government services. Again, that's become easier as gov.uk has come around, but still a lot of the time things like what people are procuring, what people are buying in government when it comes to technology and digital is most of the problem. The people who are the people who have the power, whether they're politically or managerially, whether they run a health service or whether they are the procurement officer, those people are often the least digitally savvy, the people who know the least around what they can expect, and therefore the people who quite often buy what they think some big supplier tells them is the right answer, and that something couldn't possibly cost 10% of that and still work. And surely it needs to do 1,000 things because IBM told me so, rather than it being the 12 things that users say they need. And so a lot of what our work is around is trying to raise people's expectations and also adjust their sort of educate around what is possible these days, because technology has changed so fast. We work around the world, and it's although not very much on continental Europe, interestingly. I was talking to Sam about that earlier. I tend to just fly over on the way to Australia. But it's interesting to see the impact around the world of what's happening in the UK. And it's very weird for the UK to be in a leading position for once. Like I think we're all probably finding it slightly uneasy still. But it is absolutely true. There is as of the 1st of July, for instance, there's now going to be a DTO in Australia, which is the Digital Transformation Office within Australian government. But this is a trend, and also some friends of mine set up things like USDS or 18F in the US that you might have heard of as well. So it really is an emerging pattern, and something that is really really great to see. It's really strange that that's sort of stripped out the image behind that. That was an image of SAP. But for what a lot of our life is about as well is really not just about the front-end customer experience. I spend a lot of work trying to bring the same principles and values into the enterprise and behind the scenes as well, because my fear is that whilst we're spending a lot of time with users and reinventing the front end of government, what is happening a lot of the time is that people inside government, people who are doing really important jobs in government, are being left behind. They're the ones who are having to use complicated finance systems, or they need to do child protection work, whilst the technology is hardly enabling them to do that work. And I think we in the UK, as much as anywhere else, have a long way to go in order to make digital end-to-end through the whole of government, rather than it just becoming the front end of government. And again, the way that we tend to view things, which is slightly different to Russell's sort of super pragmatic perspective, is that we believe it's almost a two-speed improvement program that we need. Yes, the foundations need to be fixed. There is no two ways about it, and that is super important. But what we're really keen to see as well is a space for imagination and a space for recreating government in a different model. PowerPoint works really well. I wish I'd just plugged in my laptop as well now. Is this going to be all the way through? I have a feeling that slide said WeGov, which is a phrase that the guys in New York who created Personal Democracy Forum use quite regularly as a nice way of talking about how are we moving from e-government to we-government. And for me, that points to the fact, one, we do need e-government still. We just did it really badly the first time. And now we're doing e-government the right way now, which is good. Which is getting our transactions correct and our services online. But also, how do we think about reinventing the notion of government and engaging people in not just a dependency culture of services that government provide them, but also how is government a collective endeavour where we all participate in a different mode of government? And in order to do that, we need to think beyond institutions and back to what public value government is there to create in the first place. As I say, these things are not in contradiction or in opposition to each other, but you need to be fixing status quo whilst thinking about what state do you want to move to. And we're working actually with GDS on some of this in some of the work that they are working towards in the next 5 years around what does a new model of government look like? One which is beyond sort of top-down institutions to one that think, oh, who knows what the other slide said? I'm sure, or that one, to be honest. It's good. It'll keep me to time by having nothing to say. So this is got so many words because it's out of one of our proposals. But the point I'm trying to make here is that for us, the way that we look at it is about how not digital actually first, but actually very much about design. First and foremost, and for us, whilst these three things need to be held together as one, they are kind of distinct and they do work together. So for us, it's about products, digital products, and how do they then drive service change? But equally, as Russell was saying, what is the implication for the organisation? How are organisations being transformed by digital products and services? And it isn't enough to be casual about that and to think that it will look after itself. Yes, change will happen inherently through digital in organisations, but it's also important to think about what kind of place you're aiming for when transforming government. So, but like a kind of a very trite example, when you think about, how might Silicon Valley approach transformation to government, which isn't always the most useful way to think about it. This is crazy. Just strip out my entire presentation. There we go. So for me, I think the important thing that we need to be thinking about is where we have opportunities to think fundamentally differently about government. How can we think back to basics instead of just saying, how do we make this thing more digital? Actually think about, well, how would you have created it? If you started with a blank piece of paper in 2015, in much the way that Spotify has radically transformed the way that music is delivered as a service, or that Netflix has disrupted the movie industry, where are there opportunities for government to think in that way as well? It isn't true that it is the right approach for every service and for every part of government. There are places where you want to start to practice this stuff without jumping to, entirely stopping government and starting again overnight. But I think that in order for us to get to the level of change that the current government that we have is looking for in terms of savings and efficiencies, we really need to be thinking deliberately about how does digital really change the organization behind the front end, and not just the front end itself. I'm going to skip through a lot of this. Two examples that I'm going to run through very, very quickly. One is actually in Australia, which is a bit bizarre given this is a British panel, but some of the work that we're doing down there is actually about this example of how can you use digital to transform a very sensitive service and the way it is organized, so that you can push the boundaries as far as possible. There are certain things where people politically and for other reasons aren't willing to try something very radical, but they are willing to say what is the very best version that digital can bring us of this service. And the one that we're working on down there is child protection, which is extremely sensitive, as you might imagine. And so trying to get them to think extremely differently about child protection and children in care is hard. So my mindset was, what is the Airbnb of child protection? How do we think very differently about the way that we organize the entire service? It was very clear they didn't want very radical change in child protection. Totally understandable. To Russell's point, they just needed the basics working because they have a very bad situation down there when it comes to their statistics. But instead, what they did allow was us to work very closely with users, very practically with users. You can tell the world is changing when a government agency sends you this as an agenda. It's a pencil drawing. And they said, there's going to be some people talking about some things, and we're going to have some users in the room, and we're going to prototype some stuff. Okay? And I was like, yeah, sounds good. Sounds like my kind of procurement process. And so that's what we did. And so we spent 3 days in a room with no windows, a bit like this, with children in care, with carers, with social workers, thinking about the challenges that they're facing with their technology right now, and trying to push their ambitions a little bit to say, okay, we can give you a better system, but can we change the way that you work together and then build the technology that supports a new way of working, rather than just giving you better technology to support old practice. And so we met a whole bunch of people. And we've got to this point now where essentially we've got a 2-speed technology system where the old world, the old legacy world, is still there because they're playing it safe. and they still want to pay people for looking after children, and there's a degree of risk that they want to manage in their legacy systems. But what we've managed to do is to be able to liberate that service from legacy and build a platform around it, which says, this is a modern user experience based on the new way of doing care in Australia. So even with the most sensitive public services, if you can think about the right strategy and the right approach based on the politics, their risk threshold, and what is possible, there are ways to do things very differently, even within a box. But then also, I think there are times when you just have to think very differently. So in Britain, we have a very bad Meals on Wheels service, so delivering food to older people. The last 5 years has seen a reduction in budgets by 70% in this service. Admittedly, the world has changed as well. Older people don't necessarily want a government food service anymore. So instead of thinking, what is a nice digital way to help them apply for a bad service, we thought about, well, what would the service be if you started again? And so we built Casserole. And it has all sorts of amazing things that I can't show you. But essentially what it is like a dating site for local communities, where somebody who has food to give is connected to somebody who wants food. And it really is fundamentally changing the role of government. So government moves from delivering a service to being a community organizer. So government's role in this is we use their contact centers as the matchmaker, as well as the app, between a cook and a diner. And so government is now this tiny little role, this community organizer role, to empower communities to actually achieve their own aspirations. And so for me, that's an example of how do you do things fundamentally differently? How do you actually make sure that you're always challenging yourselves to say, do we improve this bit of government, or do we stop this bit of government and think very differently about it? For me, the key through all of this, and it chimes with what Russell was saying, but a lot of it has to be about designing with people. The consultation model is broken and dead. If you design with people, you don't really need to consult them, because what are you asking them? Do you like this service that we designed together? Obviously. I do think there is something to be said around nice things. People like stuff and they like nice objects, and it's a way to raise people's expectations. I look forward to the day when government procures for user experience. Right now it's 80% cost, 20% quality. And I think that needs to change, particularly as cost is different. And also I would say that whilst we need to build the foundations for sure, we also need to look for every opportunity to fundamentally disrupt government, to think about what is the Spotify of government or the Uber for government. How do we do more casserole clubs in order to stop delivering government services that were designed 100 years ago and create new government services designed for 2015 and into the future? Because exactly, if we don't do it, if government doesn't take the lead on this stuff, someone else will. And for me, the important thing is that government plays a role in this because it does have a unique position. It does have legitimacy and democracy at its heart. And for me, it's about how do we actually give government the power to work with citizens to lead this agenda. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic. If this is fine with you, we'll take question right after Sam's talk for the three of you. So thank you for offering me transition with Australia on transnational circulation of the British model. Sam Jeffers' agency, Blue State Digital, is well known for his role on the Obama campaign. So Sam seems to be the perfect speaker to tell us if Brits do it better.
No.
Welcome.
Okay. Oh, hi. Hi, yeah. So I hope, to some extent, for the basis of this conversation, that you all did follow the general election that just happened in, is that on or off? I need it higher, clearly, in Britain. But I will provide a little bit of context. I suppose in some respects, all you need to know is that line under, under there. You know, the Labour Party ran a really effective and tremendous digital campaign to achieve the goals set out for the digital campaign. Unfortunately, the Labour Party didn't win the election. And so an interesting point, perhaps even coming back to what we were talking about, you know, you can't change everything and you can't affect everything through digital. Yes, you can raise more money, you can get more people volunteering, you can get your message to more people in a more targeted way than you ever have before, but there are fundamentals that underpin everything. So I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about the sort of setup of all of this, then take you through some of the examples of things we worked on. Some of those things perhaps have a sort of different genesis from the way that, again, two previous speakers have been kind of designing things and building around user needs. It's somewhat a different context to do things in, but some of the same ideas. And hope to show actually that, you know, perhaps rather than when you're building things for people that they want to use or they should need to use, some of the stuff around campaigning is building things to make people use things or to encourage them. So, that, you know, perhaps Russell's point about the death of marketing communications is less the case when you're trying to get people to do things they perhaps don't want to do, but, you know, are good for them in the end, like joining in a political campaign and, you know, doing some volunteering and so on. So obviously Labour was kicked out of government in 2010. You know, so our role really is to help Labour get back into government in 2015, helping to elect Ed Miliband, who's the leader of the Labour Party, been Labour leader for 5 years, and just some sort of context around where we were. This is kind of the election polling. So the red line is Labour, the blue line is the Tory party, the two parties that ultimately would lead government, perhaps be a majority government, deadlocked year after year after year in the run-up to the election. Polls showing almost no gap between them. As far as we could tell, you know, it was going to come down to really what happened on the day. So that's an important piece of context. You know, right there with a shot at winning, it wasn't you know, a foregone conclusion, the result that ultimately came about. These are the personal ratings of the leaders, and it's a very important part of it. But if you see, the blue line is David Cameron's rating, the red line is Ed Miliband's rating. You know, these are very challenging things, you know, leaders, policies, trust, big parts of an election campaign, and some of the things that digital campaigns can influence, but there are some real fundamentals out there that kind of fit in the wider landscape as well. So that's a difficult circumstance to start with. This one's trust on the economy. Labour has a 20-point deficit on trust on the economy. The Tories have done a great job of selling the story that Labour had caused the global economic crisis, effectively. You know, not quite sure how they caused the global economic crisis, but they caused the global economic crisis. We were all suffering the pain of that, and it was Ed Ball's fault, you know, who was the chancellor, you know, the shadow chancellor, and he kind of led us to the crash. So great job of kind of settling that story. And then the Tories' resources, enormous amount of money, predominantly given them by hedge funds. You know, huge resource difference between the two campaigns about what they were going to be able to do. So those are the sort of headwinds we were facing. And our digital strategy really had 3 points that we were looking to focus on. So those were the message. So can you get the Labour Party's message to the right people in the right places? So places where, you know, the gap between the Tories and Labour is very small. Labour can win seats, swing voters essentially. Can we get our message to those people? Second is, can we raise enough money? The Labour Party was having some funding challenges around support from the trade unions, but also obviously that massive spending gap with the Tories. So can you find the funds to make the campaign, give the campaign the resources it needs? And thirdly, to mobilise people. So get people out on the streets, talking to one another, volunteering for the campaign. And the most powerful way of persuading people is if you know, your friend says to you, I'm going to vote for that, you know, that Labour Party. They seem like they're headed in the right direction. So those 3 things. And those 3 things have been consistent for ever, really, in political campaigns. And, you know, perhaps even since the 2004 Howard Dean campaign have been the fundamental underpinnings of any digital campaign. The 3 things that you're trying to make happen. Certainly, you know, best exemplified through the 2 Obama campaigns, done very well here for the Hollande campaign in 2012. So, you know, a good track record of being the kind of underpinnings of what happens. And so there are some British twists on that, but there are also some real consistencies that have been built up over the practice of this type of work over the last sort of 10, 15 years. Did I say message already? Maybe we double up. Okay, this is about message. So some of the things that we were trying to put out really were, excuse me, to kind of, and I'm not going to make the videos play because I'm not going to trust they're going to work, but trying to make sure that people understood that the Tory plan was breaking parts of Britain, that people weren't happy with lots of the ways that the Tories were working. So this video sort of sets out, things that they've done over the last 5 years, like cutting services, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of ends with David Cameron saying, imagine 5 more years of that. So sort of a bit of negative kind of scene setting to, to get that out to people, and, posting to Facebook and pushing that out to the right audiences and promoting that in the right way, trying to make sure that we set the scene for Labour's message, which was that the Tories had one plan for Britain, Labour has a better plan for Britain. Labour has a plan that is, more based on equality and an understanding of how people can get along in life and working people can kind of be successful. And so using people like Steve Coogan, who's a big comedian in the UK, popular guy, to kind of front that message, a very traditional thing, party political video, but again, using things like Facebook and so on to reach people perhaps in a different way than we had previously. Then using things like digital tools that we're building for the first time. And I think we give massive credit to Catherine Siegel, particularly of the Labour digital team, the amazing team they ran over there, the biggest digital team that certainly the Labour Party's ever had, doing the most work and building incredibly smart things. So, perhaps where we were helping set some of the framework and things for how things should happen, they were running the campaign day to day and coming up with brilliant ideas like this. So for those of you, the NHS is this sort of national institution in the UK, been around since 1946, 9, I can never remember if it's 6 or 9, but everyone effectively born in Britain, or something, 80% of people born in Britain were born under the NHS. And effectively there's a line that runs through history that can tell you which number baby you were born on the NHS. So you stick in your birthday, it'll tell you you are the 15,277,216th baby born on the NHS, and it will produce a customized Facebook share graphic for you. 1.5 million people did this and gave their data to the Labour Party to join in the campaign. So they found out a lovely personalized fact about themselves, something they wanted to share with others, something that brought them into the campaign and kind of aligned them with the overall message of the Labour Party being the protector of the NHS. And act as a massive basis for the campaign going forward in terms of who you can communicate with and who you can start to kind of get them thinking about, well, I understand the message, now can we get them giving some time or some money to the campaign? So coming up with little clever, personalised ways of doing this, I think was actually something of an innovation on the Labour campaign for that. And there were a couple of other examples, which if you come up and talk to me afterwards, I can kind of take you through as well. And then just putting assets in people's hands to get the message out there. So giving people graphics, simple things that they can push out through their channels to kind of promulgate the Labour Party message. So it's kind of simple stuff, not particularly innovative in its own way, but again, very well tested and optimized over time, that if you give people the tools to campaign for themselves, they'll start to do that for you. And these were reaching, messages were reaching upwards of millions of people a week, effectively. So, notionally as effective as a sort of TV or any other mass media channel in terms of reach. Here's an example that probably Russell wouldn't have put on his list of things to do, but this is Labour Party manifesto, the big policy book that everyone releases about a month before the election. Everyone, what they're going to do, their programme for government. No one ever reads it. Typically, people put it out as a PDF, the press talk about it for a day or two, then everyone forgets about it and they start making up new policies all over again to kind of meet the shortfalls as they're seen. We at least built this with some user workshops and some actual user demands in mind. How will people actually want to read this? How will they want it delivered to them? This gave people options to personalize, so they could pick out the areas they were most interested in and be delivered a kind of personalized manifesto. Now, it's a start, and I think it's one of the ways that people can talk about policy. It's interesting, obviously, hearing about things like collaborative democracy and getting people more involved in those types of decision-making and how you kind of set out the path ahead. But there's a little inkling of how policy can kind of work for people in a slightly better way. And then finally, you're looking at how you use other things to get the biggest reach you possibly can. So this is Russell Brand, comedian, film star. Labour Party took a big risk going to see him, doing an interview with him to access, his X million YouTube subscribers and make sure that, he would give them at least a fair hearing, and it turned out actually an endorsement. And so on. So again, reach and finding ways through that aren't necessarily your own channels. Where can you go out to other places to find the audiences you want to talk to? And so what happens when you start giving people all of these things to do and lots of different channels and openness is a rather strange thing. So, Ed Miliband is very noted for being somewhat socially awkward, or at least coming across in a way that people don't expect from, the confident, presenting, politician. But this thing built up, which was a kind of teenage fan group building, a kind of sexy Ed Miliband meme up and taking hold of it and trying to do things to kind of show that actually he was kind of like a normal guy and fanciable and he could be smart and do normal things. And so, a lot of the effort of the message here, again, is trying to look at that kind of that personal approval rating. And, we'll see later on what happened with that. But, fun things, people being creative, the campaign allowing people to kind of take their material and kind of run with it. So the next part of it, and this isn't really in any particular order, is money. So fundraising email is still a huge part of raising money for political campaigns. And it doesn't change that much. In fact, it gets simpler and simpler, fewer and fewer graphics, less and less adornment, fewer words, all the rest of it. And what you're looking for are, so the format is really tested and optimized to the max. There isn't really much left to play with here. There are things here like the big red buttons performed a little bit better than slightly smaller red buttons and, very kind of incremental type improvements. But you're also looking for ways to jump out. So actually we found a Labour Party supporter called David Cameron, who lived in Scotland, to send this email for us. So it would jump out of people's inboxes, look a little funny, raise a little money. And so there's a certain amount of tolerance for the kind of play on the internet of doing something like this. But actually, this was a really effective fundraising technique and raised much more than a standard kind of fundraising email that was going out every third day or something like that. The actual follow-up email came from a Labour Party member called George Osborne as well, who is the Chancellor. So a little bit of fun you can have with this stuff. We also got people like Grayson Perry. So Grayson Perry is a big sort of artist and cultural figure in the UK to design merchandise. So a simple bag with an image, obviously, of picture here designed on it, going out for £30 a time. These sorts of things were, very culturally appropriate for the party's support base, fit very well. And, these things are raising £50,000 to £100,000 a time when they're going out. This one's, again, very British, NHS, but it's tea towels, things you do you're drying up your dishes with after you've eaten dinner. 2 tea towels, £20, £50,000 raised selling simple merchandise. So just, again, fun things, ways of engaging people with the Labour Party story, using cultural figures and so on to kind of build up that pattern. And in terms of donations, just really off the record, off the charts for a UK political campaign, about £3.5 million, I think, raised in the end through small donations. I think that's the most anyone's ever done in Europe. Obviously, in the US, that number would be 100 times that large. So it's still a long way to go in terms of fundraising. Whether we don't have politics where money is everything, but again, for the UK, a totally different way of funding a campaign perhaps is possible in the future, rather than relying on some of the big donations that make such a massive difference right now. The final one I want to talk about is mobilization. And so again, this has elements of kind of good service design around it, but it's also just trying to meet a need and trying to get people into doing something they're not totally familiar with doing. So perhaps more like the kind of casserole club example than anything else. But how do you make it really easy for people to volunteer for a campaign? So, give us some really simple information, your phone number and your postcode, and we'll start to work out what you need to make that happen. So gradually, obviously, over time, the urgency of that message increases. What we've got here is the result of filling in that form. So it's a little bit personalized. It calls you by your name. It's localized. It tells you what's happening near you. It tells you in the constituency you're going to go campaign in, how many votes we need to swing to win the seat, how many other people have volunteered, and then what's next. It gives you a massive long list of all the different events that you could be attending. So this is the stuff here, like find a local campaign event, and it's listing hundreds and hundreds of different events where you could be going out, knocking on people's doors, talking to them about the Labour Party campaign, trying to make a difference. In the end, over 100,000 people signed up through here. And actually, if you compare the activism rates of the people who did this versus the people who've been long-standing Labour Party members, it was like a factor of 20 or something difference between people signing up, going through this process, getting a call from a local organiser and going to an event versus I've been a member for, even personally now, I've been a member for 20 years. The number of actual party events I've been to is very, very small. So there's a completely different user experience, really, for people joining in the campaign and kind of getting going for the first time. Again, and then you try and combine this idea of the sort of more playful digital edge of things with the actual meat of the campaigning. So this is getting people to make their voting commitments on the day. I'm going to vote on this day, at this time, at this place, and I'm going to vote for the Labour Party. And lots of evidence shows that if people do this type of activity ahead of voting, they anchor themselves into the behaviour and then they actually go and do it. So again, trying to get people to make these kind of commitments, but using the sort of language that the campaign had developed and the tone of the campaign to make that happen. This is just another example of like final day events, and again, like tested emails, you know, big red buttons, simple stuff that people can kind of get going with. But then there was a result, and so you know, clearly the Labour Party didn't win the election. The polls showed absolutely deadlocked to the last minute. You know, at 10 o'clock on election day in the UK, they released an exit poll, so a prediction of what's going to happen, and clearly the Labour Party suffered a very bad defeat, and David Cameron was re-elected. And I think a few lessons about that. One is there are factors that somewhat out of your control. The afterglow of the Scottish referendum gave the SNP a very strong position in Scotland and meant that Labour suffered a very damaging defeat up there. The funding gap was massive and very hard to overcome. Where the Labour Party could test and optimise as they went, the Tories could invest in that on a massive scale. And where, for example, they were sending, you know, direct mail post to people's houses, if they found a message wasn't working, they could afford to go back and send another piece, whereas the Labour Party had had their one shot. So again, there is something about needing the resources and assets for being able to do that kind of test and optimise and move forward thing. Interestingly, both had much larger budgets than the whole of digital government in the UK, but you know, there we go. And although, you know, you can see that Ed Miliband, you know, his approval line tracking upwards right up to election day, we never quite caught up. You know, David Cameron was seen as sort of trusted, authoritative leader. I think people got into the polling booth and they made their decision on the day, you know, something that the polling didn't discover and so on. So it was a very tough defeat, really, given all the good work, particularly for the digital side of things, given all the work that was there. I think qualitatively and probably quantitatively, we beat every aspect of the Tory campaign on the other side. But, you know, there are still, it's really important to understand that there are kind of bigger picture and kind of other raw materials out there that are very influential. So I suppose in conclusion, this type of digital campaigning works anywhere. You know, we now know that we've done it in the UK, it's really effective, it's at least at delivering these types of results. Done it in the US, obviously the Hillary campaign's just kicking off, and it started off really, really well, fantastic at kind of creating its brand and selling its story and doing a really polished job of that. It worked here, it's worked in Brazil, Mexico, etc., etc., etc. But you still have to have the raw ingredients of a winning campaign to be able to give that campaign lift off. And I think that's probably the conclusion there, is that in the end, there were some fundamental things that the British public weren't convinced of, and no digital campaign was ever going to change their mind about.
Thank you very much. Of course, we're running very late on the planning, but it would be nice to have a few questions from the room.
Hello. C'est bon, ça marche? Hello, I got a question for Russell Davies. I want to know how citizens are actually involved in the way you redesign your service online.
Well, we in the way that you would expect, I guess. We do loads of user research and we watch the analytics. Yeah, that's the beauty of digital stuff. You can see what's happening. And so we launched an alpha a year before we started, I think, or before we officially released gov.uk. We released a beta about 4 or 5 months after that. We were fortunate in that before that we were able to look at all the search logs, all the web behavior on Direct Government Business Link, which were the preceding sites. So we basically looked at those and said, what's the number one thing people are trying to do? Make that easy. What's the number two thing people are trying to do? Make that easy. And kept working down the list. We mandate some things like a team working on something can't go then more than, I'm trying to remember, I think it's 6 weeks without going to user research. So they have to sit and watch real users using their thing. We don't do focus groups. We don't do, we watch people use the product, basically, in as many ways as we can. Does that answer the question?
You have a lot of complaints of the functioning of the whole system working.
Say again?
You have letters of complaints of people who are dissatisfied.
Yes.
How do you organize it?
Well, I guess there's two areas of understanding, to put it one way. There are our users who we can see using the website, and who we have a button on every page that says, if there's a problem with this page, let us know, and people let us know, because there are obviously problems on pages. There are data that's wrong, statistics, there are now about 3,000 people, I think, across government who can publish on gov.uk. So, some mistakes will happen. So there's that level of stuff. There are people who don't like the site. There are people who think it's too boring. There are people who think that we should use a second font. There are people who think we should have pictures. There are, and at a bigger level, again, it's not finished. The site effectively used to be optimized for about 20% of its users. People in central government, people with very specialist needs, tax accountants, that kind of thing. When it got redesigned, the overall emphasis was probably to optimize it for the other 80% of our users. People who actually needed to find out what maternity pay was. People who actually needed to apply for things, stuff like that. That means that there are definitely people that we are underserving. There are people with very specialist needs who need to find out about very particular things about legislation or tax accountancy and stuff like that. The site is not good enough for them at the moment. We are trying to make that better, and some of those people don't like what we've done, and they're right to not like what we've done, and we're trying to fix that. And then there are, as with any big site change, there's sort of change rage. People just don't like new websites. And then there are people there is a small group of people who are professionally vested in understanding how the old site worked. So they have lost an edge that they used to have. Not necessarily on the two big things, but there are particular arcane bits of government where knowing where to find a piece of information was professionally useful to you. And now we've made that either harder or either harder for you or easier for everyone else. And so there are some areas where we get complaints about that. We don't get very many letters anymore, but we get loads of feedback. It basically goes straight to the team responsible for building the particular thing, and then they try and get back to the person.
Thank you. Question, anyone?
Thank you. You've been talking about users and what you can learn about them. So that brings the question of what do you do with all that user information in a country where encryption is about to become illegal? And obviously the government is pretty much shameless about surveillance. So do you have any of you, by the way, any guidelines of what you can do, what you feel comfortable with, what you feel uncomfortable with, in regards to that data you get?
Well, GovUK uses HTTPS, so it is all encrypted, and we would recommend that for all government services. Again, when we say we look at user behavior, we don't collect any personal information. Again, government departments are very interested in personalizing services. We tend to resist the idea of personalizing services because it means collecting more data. So we don't do that. Equally, we've been very resistant to putting things like social media sharing buttons on gov.uk, even though comms teams are very in favour of us doing that, because that means sharing people's data with Facebook and Twitter, etc., and who knows what. We've, I think, built our own version of Google Analytics so that we're not doing the same thing with Google. GDS is built up of old school web hippies who would protect user data as much as they can.
Sam, maybe about the use of data in campaigns or government, and in the US or in the UK?
I mean, obviously the campaign I just showed you has a lot of personal data on people and is designed to both give people the best experience we can give people of a digital campaign, but equally to, as efficiently as we can, get people doing as much as we can for that campaign. Now, you know, I suppose the basic level is that we're not so involved in some respects around the kind of, you know, that kind of, I suppose, more cutting edge kind of data privacy protection conversation. You know, our role is really to comply with all the laws that are put our way, and if users want to unsubscribe or have their data deleted, that's something they can absolutely do. But you know, on the other hand, you find that you know, pretty much every company you interact with is trying to do exactly the same stuff. I think, you know, there was certainly had this conversation a lot in 2012 and here, you know, about the use of political databases and the fear of people knowing your political preferences and kind of working off that sort of stuff. I mean, I think the risk in politics, in a sense, isn't especially different now, given the pervasiveness of digital stuff into the rest of your life. It's not massively different, and I think until we get to a state where we surely will, you know, give it 1,000 years, and we will get to a state where people will use your personal data again. You know, that persecuting state will come in and look through the old political database and do things with it, you know, and it will happen somewhere. You know, I don't think it will happen in our stable Western democracies this week or this decade, but maybe I'm naive.
Yeah, I mean, we hold very sensitive data on children and other things. So I think the key thing really is just around, as Russell was saying, like being very clear about what your design principles are around that stuff. Being clear what your ideology is as well. I don't think people spend enough time thinking in the tech world a lot of the time. Not necessarily the developers, to be honest, because more often than not, the developers are the unreconstructed hippies who will protect and do look at it like, well, I don't want my data shared in that way, so why would I build a thing that contravenes other people's civil liberties? So it's less that, it's more when it gets abstracted to product designers potentially or management, where people are a little bit casual about asking for requirements that they're not thinking through the implications of what they're doing, and they're not coming at it from an ideological or moral based decision-making framework, which I think is super important when we're building these services. Like, for instance, one of ours is that we don't want to build a service. And, you know, this is when your principles are tested, when government stretches you as a client. But we don't want to build a service that doesn't give a user equal access to their data, which is how we build our services right now. Everything you know about me, I know about me, I know you're holding about me, is one of our founding principles in FutureGov. So I think it's just about knowing what your principles are and trying to stick to them as best as you can a lot of the time, which is tough when you have conflicting legislation, conflicting business and moral priorities. But then you just got to decide who you are, right?
One last question or the break?
Come on, there has to be a woman with a question.
So there will be women on the next round table.
Okay.
So please stay with us.
There's one there.
There you go.
Thank you. There needs to be a woman. Actually, it's a question that I've seen on Twitter about this event. Everyone's wondering if you guys have some experience about how that would work in France. Basically, no, I'm thinking more about like the way you work with FutureGov was with government and with public institution. That's something that is happening in France, but maybe a little slower. I'm actually curious how you got the legitimacy to work this way.
So my background is government, so I think that was pretty important. I think it's interesting. I've been to Paris a couple of times recently and spoken to the guys at Super Public and the 27e Région.
The 27e Région.
And the great work that they're doing in helping municipal government to rethink the way that it delivers services and engages. I think, I met a few digital design agencies who are trying to work with public sector, and they were pretty much 2 or 3 people because the market felt really small, and the passion was there. But I think it feels like, FutureGov only exists because I know government really well, and I know how to persuade government to do things. Whereas I feel like there might be a bit of a missing middle. It feels like the gap between the people on the outside in France, from my limited experience, are quite far away from government and don't have the language or the opportunity to find their way into government. And people in government are a little bit a bit more hierarchical and a bit more top down than we have in the UK. So that gap needs to be closed somehow, I think, in order that, there is clearly a huge amount of civic innovators in France who are desperate to do more than, a small thing in their community and would love to participate. And I think, GDS is a prime example, and our work as well. All the time we have developers and designers coming to us and saying, okay, I've designed the future of a calendar app, or I've built, a messenger service, yet another one. And it's time for me to do something that matters. And I feel like there's the same market in France. You just need the sort of political opportunity, I think, to open that up, I would say, so from my experience.
I'd say there are a few things that are sort of necessary conditions for doing this. One is that you need people who are prepared to spend a large number of years doing really boring things. It's not cool. It's like we're not doing cool, clever, innovative stuff. You need some people in order for the innovative and interesting things to happen. And I'd agree with Dominic that there's room for imagination and all that, but it needs to sit on top of something that works. And we're a long way from that. So you need these people who are zealous and enthusiastic and impassioned about civic stuff to say, okay, I'm going to spend 5 years making a really boring website. So that's one thing. If you talk to the Estonians, who are the most advanced digital government in the world, they would say they were able to do that because when the Russians left, they took all the money and all the legacy. So they had to start from scratch. They had to rebuild everything, and they did it all at the same time. So their whole thing works properly. They threw away, they had nothing left. What most legacy governments should probably do is throw everything they've got away and start again, but they won't do that. You need a crisis of some sort. In the UK, it was NHS technology, like just billions of pounds thrown away. You need some people who are prepared to go into government and talk to governments that they might not ideologically support, but write them a good digital strategy. And, just kind of hold their nose and say, I don't necessarily support that, but here is what you should do. Whichever government gets in, this is what you should do. You need people who are prepared to do that. And you need to actually build some stuff. Mike, who's my boss, talks about how when he, before he thought about taking this job, he went and taught, loads of people had his job before. There had been e-envoys and digital czars and blah, blah, blah. He went and talked to them all and said, what did you do wrong? And they all said, I spent a year writing a report about the government's digital strategy. And by the time I'd finished it, the machine had worked out how to stop me. So the first thing that someone does when they get inside the machine is you need to build something, because government can't cope with the fact that, or the machine can't cope with the fact that it's really quick and easy to build stuff. They know how to deal with reports. They don't know how to deal with things that actually exist in the real world.
Thank you. That might be the last word. Thank you, Russell.